Welcome back. In this episode, I'm going to introduce some basic Substance Painter techniques and concepts. And I thought I would do that with the interior pieces because it's a little simpler and smaller. So first thing is we want to close our exterior so we can see our interior, and then make sure you switch texture sets so that you're working on the right one. If you look over here on the left, these two items are connected. So if you click one, it's going to affect the other. So we want to be on our interior texture set, which is currently empty. We can close that. And in general, it's good with Substance Painter to start with the base material like metal, plastic, wood, ceramic, and then on top of that add paint, varnish, and then on top of that decals and stencils, and then on top of that weathering. So you're kind of working from the bottom up. Now, there are lots of materials that come with Substance Painter. You can go to Adobe, download additional ones, or you can go to third-party websites, and they also have really nice material. So you can enhance your library from what comes automatically with it. I want the base to be aluminum, so I'm going to choose this aluminum material, and I'm just going to stick it here, and it's going to apply the aluminum to the whole model. Now, we don't want aluminum on the whole model. We don't want it on the exhaust stack. So I'm going to create a white mask, which is not going to affect, it's not going to make it change any, but if we select 4 on our top keyboard, which is the same as selecting this button here, going into the masking, polygon fill, puts masking mode. And then you can choose how you want to mask things. So you can choose by object or UVs, or you can also just click and drag over. And if nothing happens, it's probably because you need to switch the color. If you hit X, it'll toggle it. So I'm going to toggle it to black. And you can see now that by clicking and dragging over that, I've taken the engines out of the aluminum group. Right? So now we just have the aluminum base material for our model. Next thing would be to do is to add some paint. Now I'm using this IPMS website, IPMS Stockholm. They have all kinds of color resources, German aircraft, World War II. They have the Schwarzgrau, including the RLM and FS numbers. And if you click on the link, it brings you to a color swatch. So what I can do is I can create a fill layer. I'm going to call this Schwarzgrau. And I'm going to just do color right now because I'm only interested in the color channel for right now. And if I click and hold on the eyedropper, so I clicked on the color, and then I click and hold on the eyedropper, and I go to my other screen, and I hold that eyedropper over that black-gray color swatch. Substance Painter will bring it right in and apply the paint. Now again, we don't want the paint on the engine stack, so I need to create another white mask. And I'm going to take them out as well so that they're not painted. So far we have painted aluminum. Next thing we can do is we can talk about projection painting. I'm going to do it on these radiators. I've got these radiators here. And there is a fence texture here, and I can go to create a paint layer now. Call this radiator screens, and if I click on the projection icon or hit the 3 on the keypad, or the 3 on the top row of numbers, so go into projection paint mode, and over here on the right you can see you can choose your channels. I want to choose color, turn on color, I want to choose height, and I want to choose metal. It creates 3 channels here, and I can click and drag this guy into each one of these channels so that when I paint, I'm going to paint simultaneously across all these channels. And the way you move and manipulate this projection screen here is if you hold the S key down and then right click and I move my mouse, I'm scaling it. And if I let go of the S key while I'm doing any of these commands, it makes it less opaque. So S, I'm not holding the S, now I am. So you can change how clearly you can see. If I hold the S and the left mouse button, I can rotate. And if I hold the S and the shift key, I can snap. And then if I hold the S and the middle mouse key, I can move it around. So I'm going to try to scale this in and try to get it lined up with that. And I'm going to scale it down. And then I'm going to go up to where it says tiling mode. I'm going to say H and V, so I'm going to tile everything. And then I'm going to hit S and scale it down even further. So I have a nice small screen. I'm going to make sure that my mirror is on because this radiator is on both wings. And I can just paint right over that. Now let's do the back. And then there's also a front radiator, and I want to turn off mirroring for that. I want to paint that, and I want to paint the front. So that's our radiator so far for the screening. But obviously we don't want it to stretch through the side like that, so I'm going to add a black mask this time, which is going to hide everything on that layer. And then if I hit the 4 key rather, and I choose UV, which is this one here, UV chunk, I can click on it. Nothing happens. You're probably backwards here. Hit X to switch, and now I can just unhide that piece of geometry or the painting that we did there. And if you hit F, you recenter your project. I kind of got out of sight there. And then one more there and one more there. So there are our radiators. All right. Next thing I want to think about is the cockpit, or not the cockpit, but the instrument panel. So we can do something similar that we did with the fence, but I'm going to import a texture for this, so I don't want to have a filter on here. You can add images to your project. Well, let me back up a second. I have In Photoshop, I created a set of images based on a picture of a 109 cockpit, and I just erased everything that wasn't an instrument, and I created a black and white version of it that I'm going to see how it works for a UV map, or a bump map rather. So I can import those images in by clicking on this plus button, add resources, and I want to go to my projects, Blender projects, 109, Blender stencils, and I'm going to import both of these. If you click and drag on these names, you can type something in here and it'll put it into both or all the rows that you've selected. So I'm going to call this stencil. And similarly, since both these are selected, I can click one and it'll apply texture to both of them. I only want this to go in my current session. I could put it into the project so that every time I open the project, the resource was there, or if it was something I wanted to use forever, I could put it into my global assets, but I only want it in the current session. So I'm going to import, and here we have the two images. I have I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call it instrument panel, and I want to turn off, I want to make sure no tiling, and I want color and height. Actually, I'm in the wrong tool. I want to be in the projection painting tool. So I want no tiling. I want just color and height, and I'm going to get rid of the old ones, and I'm going to replace them. I'm going to put the panel color here, and I'm going to put my bump there. Hit S to scale it up, Shift S and snap, or Shift S to snap it so it's horizontal, and I'm just going to kind of move it into place here so it's close. I mean, this is not a accurate interior, obviously, because it doesn't fit, but we can paint over it. And you can use the 2 key to delete. You just want to make sure that whenever you're deleting, that your eraser, I hit 2 to turn on eraser, you want to make sure that the channels that your eraser is affecting are the same channels you're painting on. So if I just paint here, you can see that it's not going to erase the bump map. So I need to add height to my channels. So if you're erasing and you don't see it erasing everything, it's probably because your channels and your bump aren't working right. So just add a little bit more stuff up here. Just add a few more things. And obviously this bump map is crazy big. And we can cut that back. All right. Try that again. All right, go back to paint. There's our instrument panel. Now we can cut back on the bump map by going to height, and then we're just going to cut this back to maybe 15, maybe a little more. And this really isn't going to be that important because it's going to be inside a cockpit that's already dark gray, so it's going to be pretty hard to see already. But I thought maybe adding a little bit of bump there would give it a little bit more detail, a little bit more interest. All right, the next thing to do is maybe add some leather. There's a couple places where there's leather. There's headrests, there's the gun sight, and then inside the wheel wells, there's some leather. So I want to find a leather material, and let's pick this one, maybe. Stick it up there. And that applies leather to the whole airplane, which we don't want. So I'm going to create a folder now, and I'm going to stick my leather in the folder because I want to apply a mask to a bunch of things. So I'm going to be doing some extra stuff with leather, and I want to apply a mask to only the leather objects. So I'm going to create a black mask, and then I'm going to, I don't need that on, I'm going to just select the objects, right? I'm in object mode selecting. I'm going to select the objects that want to have leather on them. And one more up here on the gun sight. And that should be our leather. Our leather is now isolated. And now I want to add a second layer of leather in here, so that's kind of a dark leather. So I want to find maybe a lighter leather. Well, we'll see what this one looks like. We're just going to put it on, see what it looks like. And you can see that when we put it inside, no, I don't like that. We put it inside that group, it only applies it to where that mask applies it. Try this one. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that either. All right, one more try. All right, last hope. I'm just looking for something light. All right, that'll work. And inside here you have the various details within that material. And you can also change these too. Like if you wanted a slightly darker color, maybe less saturated, more saturated, you can certainly play with any of these values. All right, I want something that's a little lighter than the upper coat. So, oh, and it didn't go inside the group. So just click and drag and put it inside the group, and I want it below that so that the dark leather's on top. Now if I add a black mask, sorry, if I add a black mask to my dark leather, and now I can add what's called a generator, which is down here. I right-click on the, so you right-click on the mask, and then choose Add Generator, and then over here you can choose the type of procedure you want to use to apply these effects. So in the beginning, when we created the ambient occlusion maps and the normal maps and all those other maps, Substance Painter uses those maps to create these smart masking functions. So I'm going to use this metal edges. And you can see that it only allows one color to come through on the edges, but I'm going to invert it because I just want the light color to be on the edges of the material, and then I can adjust the wear level one way or the other if I want it to be more prominent, less prominent. Right? It shouldn't be too prominent. You can increase the contrast, decrease the contrast, just to kind of get it to make it look a little bit more aged, a little more weathered. All right, so that would be the leather. And then of course you can also add, if you wanted to, custom brushwork. So for example, this procedural thing just kind of gives you a good start, but let's say we wanted to add some extra wear in the middle here, maybe where the pilot's head was. I can right click here, add paint, and then inside of paint, if I select an interesting brush, so maybe like a dirt brush, maybe dirt 2, and I use the left square bracket to shrink that down. Now I can paint inside that mask, and if you don't see anything, it's because you need to swap colors. So I hit the X key, you can see up here it's swapping, and now when I paint in here, I'm revealing the material that's underneath, and if I hit X again, I can kind of take that back a little bit, and you can change the flow of your brush so that it's more opaque, less opaque, kind of does a blend. Often a blend is better than solid. You can change all your sizing, your spacing, and then if you're using a tablet, right now for recording purposes, I'm not using a tablet. I suggest you do. You can change whether or not there's pressure sensitivity for the size and flow of your materials. So right now for recording, I'm just using a mouse. All right, so that could be the leather. And let's do another example of weathering. I'm going to add a generator to our paint level. So I'm going to add, right click, add generator. And I'm going over here, I'm going to use the same metal edges again. Now again, I need to invert it. And you can see that automatically figures out where the edges are and exposes the aluminum that's underneath. And because our leather was in a separate masked area, it's not affected by that. And you can adjust the wear levels. So if we want it to be more or less, and adjust the contrast, how much you want it to show through. And then just like the leather, I can right click on the mask, add paint, and if I wanted to maybe add additional worn metal here, I can just paint it in and really give it a custom look. Like I said before, that generator just kind of gets you started, but the ability to hand paint these textures in lets you really decide, okay, well this piece is worn, that piece is not worn. It makes it look a lot less machine generated. So what you would do is you just go around your model and you figure, okay, this area here gets a lot of wear, so the metal's going to come off of it, and just go around and paint it by hand that way. All right, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to just continue to do what I just showed you, but I'm going to actually take my time doing it. My goal here was to introduce you to the ability to add materials and masks to your model, how to project paint, how to project details. We didn't have to model any of that stuff. So I think that is a good introduction to the basics. So like I said, I'm going to go offline and I'll actually do this with some care using the same techniques that I just used, and then I'll come back and I'll show you the final results. All right, I spent some time working on this a little more carefully than I did in the first part of the video. Just hand painting in and out some of the worn edges and adding some extra layers of detail. And I figure what I do now is work my way up the stack and explain some of the things that I changed. So for one thing, when I created this black-gray first layer of paint, I did not have a roughness channel on it. Right, we just had the color. One of the things you can do in Substance Painter is, I added a roughness channel by clicking on roughness, and there's a whole bunch of textures in here under the noise category, which are really useful for adding kind of a varied types of roughness to your textures because they're kind of random. Some of them are procedural. They all project nicely onto the model, and they can be combined to create very complex patterns of noise. And you can take any one of these and just click and drag it into the roughness channel, which is what I did here. This spots 3 noise, which is this one here. Just clicked and dragged it up here, and then just played with the parameters just to make it the roughness that I wanted. And one way to fine tune your different channels is up here on a material, you can isolate the channel you're working on. So you can look just at roughness here. So obviously anything that's darker is going to be shinier, anything that's lighter is going to be more matte, and you can change values here. So if I wanted to make things darker, lighter, darker being glossier, basically what you want to do is you want to go through here and tweak your values until you get something like change the scale, the rotation, the offset, until you find something that you think is going to translate into the type of roughness or other characteristics that you're looking at. And then of course you can do the same thing for base color, where we see just the base color. and any of the other channels. And then the combined thing is materials. So as far as the paint goes, I just added a little bit of roughness, and that gives it a little bit more realistic reflectivity. As things go across it, it's not absolutely perfectly smooth. You see some imperfections. The next thing I did is I worked on the exhaust stacks, and you can see I added some heat to them. So they started off, created a folder for them, and I'm just going to color it here so we can see which one. So all the red ones are in the exhaust stack. If I turn that one off first, this is just a steel shader that I grabbed from down here just to create the base level metal. And then I created this folder called heat. And inside here, I created a bunch of colors. I just painted them on. All right, so you can see that these are just painted on blue, purple, orange, yellow. And I just used some reference material to figure the angle of it. And all I did was paint the color because the underlying material is metallic already, so that's why the colors look metallic. And then I added to these, you can right click on this and you can say add a filter, and I added a filter. I added a blur filter, and that just blurs the colors into each other. And you can see the result is you get this nice gradient of colors to make it look like the exhaust stacks were hot. All right, going back up a little further, created a separate shader for the gun sight using the same masking techniques I talked about before to isolate the gun sight from the other objects in the scene, and just added colors and a generator to it. There's basically just a paint on it, and then just hand painting the edges here, which exposes the underlying aluminum because it's part of the same mask there. So that's the gun sight. And then to just kind of dirty things up a little bit, I added this dirt here, which actually started off as one of the rust textures that comes with Substance Painter. It started off as this one. I just dragged this one up here, renamed it as corner dirt, and then I just changed it to be less red. It originally comes in as this pretty red. I made it more of a brownish color, and then put a mask on it and added a dirt generator to it, which creates this. It uses probably like the ambient occlusion mask to put dirt into the corners, and then you can add a blur to it, right? So I can say add filter and then select blur from the filter list, and that's going to smooth out that gradient. And then just some hand painting, so I added some hand painted dirt here and there where I thought a little more dirt was necessary. All right, that's how I finished that off in Substance Painter. In Blender, I exported the textures, brought them into Blender, I did some renders. As expected, once you're inside the cockpit, it's very hard to see. You can kind of see some details like the instrument panel there. I think it's enough for what we're doing. We're not going to do any interior cockpit shots, but I think there are enough hints of detail. I think particularly the instrument panel works out pretty well considering all we did was paint those things on there. It gives the illusion that there's a instrument panel there. Gun sight worked out okay. Yeah, so that's it for that lesson. In the next lesson, I'm going to talk more about Substance Painter, but we'll work on the outside of the airplane. Probably start some camouflage painting. That should be interesting. All right, I'll see you there.